Dr. Will Thalheimer, it is a pleasure to have this conversation with you about the LTEM measurement methodology. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks, Alaina, for having me here.
Well, what this video series is all about is helping us practitioners figure out what's the best methodology we should be using for what we're trying to do. And there's so many great tools out there. And of course, Dr. Thalheimer's LTEM framework. And there's another one coming out soon, more to come on that. These resources are incredible. And we just want to know, when should we be using them? Why do they matter? And why you created them in the first place. So lots of questions to dig into. Let's start with the first one. What's this LTEM framework? What is it? Why did you create it? Tell us more.
Sure. So let me give a little background on me so you'll know why I created it. So I'm a consultant in the learning space. I spent a lot of years looking at the learning sciences and helping companies build more effective learning interventions based on the learning sciences. Along the way, I got interested in learning evaluation. I noticed that some of the ways we were doing learning evaluation didn't make sense if you look at the learning science. So, for example, we tend to measure right at the end of learning when everything's top of mind for our learners. Well, the problem with that is that that's really creating some biased results, some not realistic results. And so that's a problem. So I jumped into this. I started studying evaluation, thinking about it. Along the way, I was talking with different companies and organizations and learning professionals, and people were expressing frustrations in learning evaluation. As I read in the field, even the learning evaluation experts were expressing frustrations.
Yeah.
So I started looking around, thinking about it. And I noticed, for example, there's research on our learner surveys, on our traditional smile sheets, that shows that they are uncorrelated with learning results. So there's lots of problems going on. In fact, once I noticed some common mistakes that we make in learning evaluation. I decided I should write a blog post, an article on this. And I thought I might get, 10 or 15 common mistakes, but pretty soon, it exploded to 54. So,
Wow.
there's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And then I saw some critiques of the Kirkpatrick model by researchers who, said things like, this is a checklist approach. It's not based on theory. There's, lots of research on learning that it's not aligned to. So I said, hey, okay. Maybe we need some new evaluation frameworks. And so I started brainstorming, and I went to some really smart people, like learning experts like Julie Dirksen, Clark Quinn, learning evaluation experts like Rob Brinkerhoff, Ingrid Guerra-Lopez, and a whole bunch of really smart practitioners. And I iterated through like 11 iterations and then published it in 2018. So what LTEM is, it's a learning evaluation framework. It's really designed to be a replacement for the Kirkpatrick model. And the benefits of LTEM, or what it was designed for, I should say, it's my belief that a model should nudge us to think useful thoughts and take useful actions, and nudge us away from taking actions that aren't so good. So one of the things we do in learning evaluation, that the number one way we measure is to measure butts and seats, attendance or completion rates. And the second most popular thing we do is measure learner perspectives, right? Smile sheets. And we know both of these aren't that good, right? So we know that, people could complete a course, but not learn, or they could learn the wrong thing. That's not a very good thing to do. Right. And we know our learner surveys are not correlated with learning results, at least the traditional ones aren't. What LTEM does is it has 8 tiers in it. Instead of 4 levels, there's 8 tiers. One of the earlier versions had 15 levels.
I'm glad you pared it down.
Yeah, that was well, I got, People gave me feedback. Well, too many. What LTEM does is it discourages in measuring attendance as a validation tool. Perfectly fine to measure attentions and completion rates. We should do that for our formative evaluation, but we don't want to validate our learning results based on that. Same thing with participation. Participation is not good enough because people could participate but still not learn, or they could learn the wrong thing or be demotivated, right? There's lots of things that can go wrong. So what LTEM does is it adds the most important advantage, I think, is that it has some learning wisdom baked into it. We are not measuring anything. We're measuring learning, right? And we need to focus on those learning factors so that we know what to change. The whole reason you do evaluation in the first place is so we can make better decisions and take better actions. If we don't have learning wisdom baked into our models, then we're not going to be making good decisions about what to improve and what to keep. So that's, there's more to it than that. But that in a nutshell is what LTEM is and why I created it.
Well, thank you for sharing more about your background. And what I didn't know, because I have had the pleasure of being in your LTEM boot camp. I'll say more about that in a bit. But I didn't know that you got to have so many people involved in giving you feedback. And actually, the interview I just did with Kevin M. Yates and his L&D detective kit, he also had a lot of, he calls it the giants whose shoulders that we stand on or we stand next to in the space of learning and development and measurement and evaluation. And so I just really appreciate hearing the thoughtfulness with which you've created this framework, of course, based on your experience, the limitations and challenges with learning, but also to complement the work that's already been out there and to streamline and make things easier for us in terms of what should we be focused on and how do we improve this thing that's so difficult, measuring program outcomes.
Well, you raise a really good point, and I emphasize this all the time that learning is difficult. Designing learning is difficult, and then you put learning evaluation over it, and you have this level of complexity that's just blown away. And we in the learning space, we're frustrated with our learning evaluation. We're all on this journey together. None of us have all the answers, and so. It's, one message to your viewers is don't beat yourselves up if you feel like you're in a box or you can't do what you want to do. We can improve. My view of things is like, hey, where are we now? What can we do to get better? Simple as that.
Yep. I appreciate there's two words that I wrote down as you were sharing. One is validation and the other is improvement. And so let's start with the improvement one, because I agree with you. Why do we measure and evaluate? There could be a lot of answers. Sometimes we do want the return on investment number that's important to us. Sometimes we want to know, did we give a return on expectations? But really, what's the most important thing? Helping us improve. Like learning and our program development processes and measurement and evaluation as a process in of itself, like we're never going to get it right. And I don't think our goal is perfection. And I think that's why some of us are so intimidated by measuring and evaluating, because it has math involved and there's these things called metrics and, we don't want to not achieve our outcome goals. But how do we improve if we're not evaluating? And that's the fun in it for me. I shared with you at the beginning of this recording. One, I'm a nerd, but two, I'm a research and developer. Like at heart, we're always improving by just trying new things and learning along the way. So yeah, the goal of any measurement methodology should be giving us good feedback and data to be able to improve. So thank you for reinforcing that, because I think that's the greatest value of the investment in measurement.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important, and I didn't realize this until I joined your boot camp, that you started doing learning audits to evaluate how much learning science is really baked into the design and facilitation, delivery of learning programs. I think that's really cool and not surprising, because when I look at the different tiers of LTEM, I understand how the design of learning can be validated by just using, and I know you mentioned Kirkpatrick checklist, not a great thing, but sometimes it's nice to have a checklist to help us validate, did we design the learning program in the best possible way to get the outcomes that we desire? And if you look at all the levels of the LTEM framework, in some ways, my greatest, simplest takeaway from your boot camp was like, let me just make sure that I'm doing the right things before we go evaluating. And so if you're looking for something that just helps you ensure I'm doing the right things as a learning designer, the LTEM framework, like bonus benefit, it's that checklist, it's that validation tool.
Yeah, it's really, people are using it in a lot of different ways. Some that I thought of in the beginning, and some that they've, thought of that I didn't think of, which is great. But the simplest way is think of it as a gap analysis. You look at LTEM, you see all the different opportunities in how you could measure learning. You brainstorm those. You don't want to do them all because that's too much investment. But if you see what you possibly can do, you're more likely to create an evaluation system or practice that gets to your outcomes that you're looking for. Simple. It's like, okay, what are we doing now? In fact, there's LTEM first came out in 2018, and already there's a doctoral dissertation on it, and El Hammurabi did it, Dr. El Hammurabi, and she recently spoke at the Learning 2023 conference. Awesome. And so it was really interesting, her research. What she had this hypothesis is that I introduced LTEM to a learning team. Number one, they'll be inspired to do better learning evaluation. Now, that's not that surprising, but her second hypothesis was that the learning team will be motivated to use better learning designs. Right. And the reason LTEM is able to do that, and that's what she found in her results, by the way. And the reason that LTEM is able to do that is because it separates learning into knowledge, decision-making competence, and task competence. So we're not focused on low levels of knowledge. We're not focused, we need a knowledge check. No, that's not good enough. We can now say, oh, wow, we are going to be evaluating our program using decision-making scenarios. We better give our learners more decision-making practice. And we know from the research on learning that realistic decision-making practice is a great way to provide retrieval practice, spacing, feedback, etc. So, to me, what LTEM does better than anything else is that it helps us think about the learning side of learning evaluation.
Julie Dirksen, who you mentioned as one of the sort of names and thought leaders that inspired LTEM, or influenced it rather, she has a new book. I think it's called Talk to the Elephant. I have it literally over there on my bookshelf, and I'm in the process of reading it. And one thing that she says, and I've just read the first quarter of the book, but I'm sure you're going to go pull it up too, right?
Yeah, I got it right here.
Wait for it.
We should show a picture.
Wait for it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Go check out Julie's book.
Yeah, wait, let me get mine too. I'll get a picture. Hold on. Okay. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Ready? We love Julie. Woohoo!
Hey, Julie.
That's awesome. So what she's referenced, and you might have other thoughts on this too, that the evaluation that we do of a learning program can either validate and reinforce and propel the power of the program itself, or it can completely take it the other direction, and it can undermine and sort of leave a sour taste, send the wrong messages even. And I just really appreciate how we don't often think that evaluation is a tool to reinforce learning. Like, evaluation can be a tool for learning just as any other methodology or design thinking that we might include. And I love that.
Actually, I remember Julie and I had a conversation about this many years ago. We were both on the same page. And the idea was, hey, if you don't have feedback loops in your work, you're not going to be able to improve, and you're not going to be able to learn. And, one way to, let's say that you want to implement the learning sciences to create the most effective learning. Well, one way to get feedback on that, you can go read a bunch of books, you can take courses from Julie and me, etc. you can go to conferences, but another way is to measure how your learning's doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can take the research, but you really have to also, on a regular basis, be getting feedback on your learning program so you know what to keep and what to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. So these two words that I've pulled out of all the great things that we've shared here, one, that LTEM can validate your learning design, but it also, just because it's a measurement system, can validate, did you do what you said you were going to do with the goals for your program? But then it gives us really valuable feedback to do the improvement work. And I can remember, I'm sure we've all had stories of our past that we can share, but I was part of a big corporate team. We did this big learning event and we had an evaluation strategy, and it was actually pretty well done. And then we never sat down and debriefed as a team the feedback from that evaluation strategy that we put in place. We did a great job collaborating on creating the evaluation. And then, I don't know, we were maybe just so burnt out because the event was a heavy lift. We were so burnt out on the event that we never debriefed it. And it was just like, what's the point?
Well, right. I mean, one of the rules of evaluation is never evaluate something unless you're actually going to use the data. What a waste of resources. But this you're not alone. I speak at conferences a lot, and there's always somebody in the audience goes, well, we gather all this data, we never look at it, or we gather all this data and we're completely paralyzed, we don't know what it means.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
Not good.
And so I would say, now, there's another book you have coming out, and I don't want to say much about it. You're welcome to say whatever you want or don't want. We'll just tease people if that's how we want to leave this conversation. But yeah, I think ultimately improvement is our goal. Why do we collect data? How should we decide what data to collect? Really should be, well, what information is going to help you improve your program? And I think that as a simple strategy to prioritize measurement and evaluation, well, leading with that, is really important.
Well, yeah, and the way I think about it is this: there's three reasons to measure learning, and this is an oversimplification. But one is to demonstrate the value. Two is to directly support our learners in learning, and three is to improve the learning. And the third one, like you said, is the most fundamental, because if we improve the learning, we're going to better support our learners, right, by creating better learning, and we're going to create more value, and then we'll have an easier time demonstrating that value.
Yeah, I love that. So when we started this conversation, I teased the audience by saying, hey, we're going to talk about three kind of core parts around LTEM. And one is like, well, what is it? So I think we have a clear sense of what is LTEM. So for viewers who've never heard of this model, one thing we haven't yet shared is, what does it stand for? Will you please do the honors of letting us know what LTEM means in its full glory?
Oh, sure. That's a good point. Once you get into something so much, you forget the details. So LTEM is the Learning Transfer Evaluation Model.
Yeah.
Learning Transfer Evaluation Model. So.
Yep. And not surprisingly, we've just talked about validating your learning design, improving your programs, improving your value. This term, learning transfer evaluation, there's a lot of research, and I know you've presented quite a bit of it in our boot camp. It's available out there, but learning transfer is, a sector in of itself. There's a lot of great books and articles that can help you understand how do we increase the chances of transferring learning into something meaningful, either in our real lives or on the job. And so I do believe in, my professional opinion, for whatever it's worth, that the LTEM model gives us a system to help understand how well are we in transferring, or how likely are we to transfer the learnings into something meaningful on the job or in real life. And that's why I personally appreciate, it's like you've synthesized a lot of the transfer research into a tool that helps us to use it and then evaluate the program and help design the program as well.
Thank you. Yeah. That was the goal.
Yeah. Yay. Awesome.
Well, and one thing, I always like to, people are shocked when I do this, but, like all models, it has strengths and limitations. And one of its strengths is it focuses on learning. One of its limitations is it doesn't focus on some other things like performance support, or performance activation based on the triggers. It's not all about the performance science. It's really focused on learning on its own. So every model, strengths and limitations, and it's important to be transparent about those, I think.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And you've actually segued into, and we've talked a bit about what is LTEM. We've talked about different ways of using it, sort of the best use cases, and there are so many more. And then I would say, to wrap up our conversation, what would be the unique challenges? Because there's a lot of challenges, and we hear it all the time that measuring learning is difficult, and there's a lot of barriers to doing so. If you could pick out one or two just unique challenges that LTEM solves for if we use this as our methodology, what would those be?
Well, I think one of the problems that we have in learning evaluation is we're and I'll include myself, we're all a little bit unclear about what the hell we're doing. There's so many opportunities, right? It's a target-rich environment, as my friends in the military would say. And so what LTEM does is it helps, it provides sort of a cognitive model for how to think about different opportunities in evaluation. So that's the main thing, and to me, that's the most important thing. One of the things I highly recommend if you're going to start a learning evaluation process, you're going to try to upgrade what you're doing or whatever, is to first get some background on the fundamentals of learning evaluation so that you can make better decisions, so that your organization can make better decisions. If you just jump into it, there's so many misconceptions in learning evaluation. So I think, LTEM doesn't solve all those problems, but it really gets us thinking about not only what our end goals are, which are transfer and the effects of transfer, but also what are the learning factors that get us there, and what are some other things we can look at measuring as well. That's the main thing. But then people, like I've used LTEM to, as I'm taking clients, learning teams through an evaluation process, just to keep your head straight about what we're doing. Because of those complexities, LTEM really helps to sort of organize our thinking around what we can do. And people have used it in conversations with customers or sponsors to say, hey, these are all the things we could measure. What's most important to you? So it's a great way to get started with those conversations with our clients and sponsors.
Yeah, I'm going to just restate that question because you sort of just buried this nugget of gold in that very awesome response. You said, here are all the things we could be measuring. What would you like to do? And I think that's great because one of the challenges is, well, what should we be doing? What metrics or what should we be doing? And I think there's a lot of us sort of wondering about that. And so to present the 8 tiers of LTEM and go, here's what we could do. And even the gap analysis idea that you shared, here's what we often do, and circle whatever.
Yeah.
And here's what we know is most valuable to tell us the likelihood of transfer of learning and then the value of learning, and point to the upper levels. And then, what would you like to do? What would you like to invest in to help us understand the value and opportunities to improve? What a great way to start an open-ended conversation, because what's great about that is you can then negotiate with your stakeholders. Like, hey, this is what we've been doing, and the consequences of that is we don't really have any visibility into what's being transferred in the higher level value. And so, it will take us more time, maybe more manpower, more resources. Maybe you have to hire a consultant like Will or myself to help you. Plug for that. But if we want to show the transfer, we want to show the higher level value, here's what that might look like, and then negotiate what are we going to agree to do. And I think that's a wonderful starting place.
Yeah. In a nutshell, it sort of helps clarify our thinking.
Yeah. An organizing framework in a space that's often confused and misguided, as you've mentioned, and it's been so for a long time. But yeah, if we don't start with something to help us clarify and just continue deepening our own knowledge and practice, we'll never get out of the weeds. So it sounds like,
this comes back to something you and I were talking before we hit the record button,
yeah,
and that is that in the field we have these. You had a good word for it, but we have these frustrations. We have these barriers.
Limiting beliefs is what
limiting
I call
beliefs.
them.
That's right. And in some sense, LTEM also provides a framework to think about what's possible, and so it gives hope. So
yeah, hope in a dark side sometimes, especially for those practitioners who are by themselves. It can feel really lonely and frustrating. But yeah, there is hope. And I don't know that you would agree with this, but from summarizing and reflecting on this conversation, it almost feels like LTEM is that foundation. Like, what could we measure? How do we measure? What are the ways that we want to make sure we design? It seems to me to be one of the fundamentals, almost like for new practitioners or for practitioners whose stakeholders aren't familiar with learning evaluation or like the learning function and what it can do, almost to present LTEM as here's what's possible to get people aligned and sort of on the same page. Seems like another great use case. Let's teach you about learning and through this evaluation framework.
I think so. Now, of course, obviously, there's many other things people need to understand. They need to understand that people, learn and forget. They need to know that there's no perfect measurement.
Right.
You should start evaluation from the beginning, not at the end of the process, like we might think if we just look at ADDIE. There's a lot of complications, but LTEM's a good start.
Yeah. Great. Well, I hope, viewers, that you are encouraged to dig in more to this framework and start applying it. And so, Will, my final question for you. Where do you want people to go to learn more, to get education from you or resources? Where should we send them to?
Well, worklearning.com is my website. And if you're specifically interested in LTEM, you could, of course, poke around and look at the menus, but I'll just tell you, it's worklearning.com/LTEM. And then you get right to the LTEM page. It's got the LTEM model. It's got an LTEM report that goes along with it to explain the whys and wherefores. And also, if you're already using LTEM, it's got a great place where you can share your lessons learned.
Awesome. Well, viewers, you know where to go to find more amazing resources. And Will, I thank you personally for taking the time and just sharing, honestly, your experience, use cases, and just insights to help us simplify what seems to be an age-old problem of measuring programs. So thank you for your contribution to our industry. We just appreciate you so very much.
Oh, you're too kind, Alaina. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, and stay tuned for more. Bye.